The smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat hung thick in the air of Combat Elite Arena, a local MMA gym tucked between a pawn shop and a tire store on the outskirts of town. The rhythmic slap of gloves against punching bags echoed through the cavernous space, a soundtrack of aggression masked as ambition. In the far corner, beneath a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like an old flytrap, Brandon Carter moved in silence. Wearing faded jeans and a gray janitor's shirt, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he pushed a mop across the polished floor. His long, dark blonde hair was pulled back in a low knot, strands flecked with silver. To anyone watching, he was just the janitor, maybe once. Strong, maybe once. Something. Now, invisible. Until the noise changed. The heavy beat of gloves paused. Laughter broke through. Hey, look, who's still playing Cinderella Troy? Blake said loud enough for the whole room to hear. Tall, brash, and chiseled like a cover model from a discount fitness mag, Troy was one of the gym's self-proclaimed kings. Cody Thompson, his equally cocky partner in bravado, snickered beside him. Phone already out recording. Brandon paused, but didn't look up. The mop moved again. Smooth, unbothered. Come on, man, Troy continued, walking over. You're always here. Watching. Mopping. You sure you ain't just jealous? Or maybe you used to fight before you got soft. Cody laughed. Maybe he's one of those washed-up guys. You know, the kind that talks about war stories but can't handle a jab. Brandon said nothing. And that silence, calm, heavy, dangerous in its own way, only fueled their amusement. You know what? Troy smirked. Let's give him a shot. A little sparring round. What do you say, Grandpa? Before Brandon could answer or decline, Troy reached forward and snatched the mop from his hands. A hush rippled through the gym. Brandon straightened. Slowly, he looked up for the first time. His eyes, calm, gray, and unreadable, locked on Troy's. No anger, no fear, just patience. The kind that didn't need to prove anything. And yet something else shifted in the air. Something subtle. Like the pause before a thunderclap. But before anyone could act on it, Dad. A voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned. At the entrance stood Bella, a lean, sharp-eyed 14-year-old girl with a backpack slung off one shoulder and a frozen expression of confusion and disbelief. Her green eyes darted from the mop on the ground to Troy, to Brandon, standing motionless in the center of the gym, and then back again. She had come straight from school to walk home with him, something they'd done since she was little. But she hadn't expected this. Brandon's jaw clenched, but only for a second. Troy chuckled and tossed the mop aside like garbage. Looks like Daddy's got a fan. Cody's phone was still recording. Brandon looked at his daughter. Her face was flushing not with shame but anger. Her fists were clenched. Her lips trembled. He turned back to Troy, voice calm as a winter lake. I'm not stepping in the ring. Troy scoffed. What's scared of a couple cameras? Come on, one round. I don't fight for fun, Brandon said quietly. Not anymore. The room was still. For the first time, Troy hesitated. Something about Brandon's voice, not loud, not threatening, sent a flicker of discomfort through him. But he masked it with a laugh. All right, Cinderella, he said, retreating toward the ring. Back to your mop. Brandon bent down, picked up the mop, and walked past his daughter without a word. He didn't meet her eyes. Bella didn't move. The door closed behind them with a soft click. The laughter faded. But the moment didn't. The walk home was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but fragile, like a glass sculpture carried across a battlefield. Brandon held the silence the way a soldier holds formation tightly, deliberately. Bella walked 3 paces behind him, arms crossed, backpack slung low like a weight she didn't want to carry anymore. They passed the corner deli where she used to beg him for ice cream, the laundromat, where they once danced to a broken jukebox and the worn-out mural that read, "Welcome to Brookside Small Town Big Heart." None of it felt the same today. At the crosswalk, Brandon finally turned. "You okay?" Bella stopped walking. "Am I okay?" she repeated, voice tight. "You're the one who just got humiliated in front of a room full of people, Dad." Brandon exhaled, not out of frustration but something deeper, like he was letting go of a weight no one else could see. "It's fine," he said, simply. "No, it's not," Bella snapped. "They disrespected you. In front of me. And you just stood there and took it. Like... Her voice broke off, fists trembling. "Like a coward," Brandon asked, calm. Bella's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away fast. She wasn't the crying type. Not anymore. "I didn't say that," she muttered. "But you thought it." She didn't respond. Brandon nodded once slowly, then turned and crossed the street. Bella followed reluctantly. Their house was modest, one story. White siding a front porch with a single wind chime that clicked gently in the breeze. The American flag by the steps was faded, but still stood straight. Like someone who'd been through a storm, but never bowed. Inside, Brandon set the mop bucket by the back door and started washing his hands at the kitchen sink. Bella threw her bag down and sat at the table, arms crossed. The silence returned. After a long minute, she finally asked, "Why didn't you fight back?" Brandon didn't turn around. The water ran over his calloused hands, clear at first, then tinged with the dust of the day. "Because I've seen what happens when people think every insult is a battle," he said quietly. Bella's jaw tensed. That's not an answer. Now he turned. His eyes, those same calm, steady eyes from the gym, met hers. But this time the calm was laced with something else. Weight. History. Regret. "I've fought before," he said. "I fought when it mattered. When not fighting meant someone else died." Bella flinched. He pulled out a chair, sat across from her. The air between them felt like a minefield. "Do you know what it means to come home from a war and feel like you brought it with you?" he asked. "To walk into a grocery store and scan exits. To hear a car backfire and duck before you know it." Bella's eyes softened, but he wasn't done. "I made choices over there," he said, voice lower now. "Some I was proud of. Some I carry." She waited. He didn't explain further. "I didn't become a janitor because I can't fight," he continued. "I became one because I've had enough of fighting." Bella looked away, ashamed now. "I just didn't want them to treat you like that." Brandon leaned forward. "People can say whatever they want. That's freedom. What matters is how you respond. And sometimes choosing not to fight is harder than throwing a punch." Bella hesitated. "But everyone at school's already talking about it." Brandon sat back. Of course they were. In a world of viral clips and 15-second judgment, honor was often misread as weakness. Silence mistaken for guilt. Dignity edited out by the algorithm. You'll hear things he said gently. "Let them talk." She nodded, but not with acceptance. With resignation. That teenage kind of nod that says, "I hear you, but it still hurts." Later that night, after Bella went to bed, Brandon stood alone on the porch. He lit a small candle, a habit he'd picked up from a fellow soldier overseas. A way of remembering. A ritual. The flame flickered in the Texas wind. His eyes scanned the horizon. But what he saw wasn't the neighborhood. It was Syria. The compound. The flashing red lights of NVGs. The screams in broken English. The decision to defy orders. The rookie he dragged out from under the rubble. The 3 friends who didn't make it back. All because he chose to go back in. He clenched his jaw. The guilt came in waves, always unexpected, always familiar. And yet something about Bella's eyes today, her anger, her fire had pulled something loose inside him, something he'd locked away for years. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to be her hero, and that he realized might require more than silence. The next afternoon, Combat Elite Arena was louder than usual. The thud of kicks against heavy bags and the clatter of weight plates rang like distant thunder. Someone had turned the music up, aggressive hip-hop, pulsing through the speakers. But over the beat, you could still hear the laughter. "Where's Cinderella Troy?" called out, voice dripping with mockery. The janitor with the glass jaw, Cody, grinned. "Right on schedule?" Across the room, Brandon Carter was kneeling collecting stray towels into a bin. He looked up only once, just long enough to catch Cody's smirk, before turning back to his work. He'd told himself the night before that today would be different. In and out. Keep his head down. Don't feed the circus. But bullies smell restraint the way sharks smell blood. Troy swaggered over his cell phone, already live streaming to an audience hungry for humiliation. "Come on, old man," he said. "Let's give the people a show. 2 minutes in the ring. I'll even keep my hands behind my back." Brandon ignored him, folding a towel with military precision. Fold, stack, repeat. Order in the middle of chaos. "Hey," Troy snapped, reaching out. This time, he didn't just talk. He yanked the towel from Brandon's hands and flung it across the floor. The gym went quieter. Brandon stood slowly, his full height, unfolding like a shadow rising from the ground. His eyes were still calm, but the calm was deeper now. He looked at Troy, then at Cody, then at the ring, where a circle of curious students was forming. "I'm not fighting you," he said, voice even. Troy laughed and stepped closer. "You don't get a choice, Grandpa. This is an MMA gym, not a church social." Cody moved behind Brandon, snatching the mop out of the bucket and spinning it like a staff. "Here's your weapon," he jeered. "Show us your war face." A low murmur ran through the students. Most were young, new to the gym, still dazzled by the idea of toughness, but even they could feel it. Something was off. This wasn't a joke anymore. Brandon's jaw tightened. His left hand twitched just once before he forced it still. "Give it back," he said softly. Cody grinned. "Make me." Then, without warning, he shoved the mop handle into Brandon's chest. The room went still. Brandon exhaled through his nose like a man trying to steady a pulse. He looked down at the handle, then back at Cody. And that's when the first punch came. It wasn't from Brandon. Troy swung a lazy, mocking jab meant to nudge more than hurt. But in his arrogance, he misjudged the man in front of him. Brandon stepped aside. The jab cut empty air, and before anyone could blink, he moved. Not fast like a brawler, not wild like a street fighter. Fast like a soldier. His left hand caught Troy's wrist, twisting it just enough to unbalance him. His right foot slid back, weight-shifting center of gravity low, and then with a single controlled motion like closing a door, Brandon redirected Troy's momentum and tapped the base of his jaw with an open palm. It wasn't even a strike, more like a redirection. But Troy's knees buckled. His eyes rolled back. He hit the mat with a dull thud, unconscious before his head touched canvas. Silence. No one breathed. Even the music cut off someone's hand, trembling on the pause button. Cody froze, mop still in hand. His live stream caught every second the casual elegance of the movement, the suddenness of the fall. The janitor who didn't look like a janitor anymore. Brandon stepped back, breathing steady. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't gloat. He just looked down at Troy, then at Cody, then at the ring of stunned faces. "Get him some water," he said quietly. No one moved. Brandon dropped the mop handle gently to the ground and walked past Cody without another glance. He picked up his towel bin, slung it under one arm, and headed for the exit. As he reached the door, a small voice called out. "Dad," he turned. Bella was standing just inside the entrance, books clutched to her chest. She must have come early again. Her eyes were wide, not with anger this time, but something more complicated. Shock, fear, awe. She looked at the fallen trainer, at the mop on the floor, at the phone still streaming to thousands of strangers. Then, at him. Brandon opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came. Not an excuse, not an explanation. Just silence. He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Inside the gym, Cody finally moved, crouching over Troy and fumbling with his phone to end the stream. But it was too late. Notifications were already flooding in. Comments exploding. Janitor knocks out MMA trainer in one hit. Who is this guy? That's no janitor. By the time Brandon reached the parking lot, the first clip had already been posted to 3 different platforms. By the time he reached the bus stop, it had been viewed 50,000 times. And by the time he turned the key to his front door, it was on its way to becoming a viral phenomenon. He didn't check his phone. He didn't need to. He knew. He also knew something else, a truth he hadn't wanted to face until this moment. The past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes silence isn't enough. By morning, the video had passed 2 million views. It had a name now. The Janitor Knockout. And the internet had a new obsession. Commentators dissected the footage frame by frame. TikTok coaches speculated about Brandon's footwork. Reddit threads debated military training versus sport combat. Someone slowed the hit down to 0.25x speed and captioned it, "One palm to humble them all." But none of that mattered in the kitchen of the small white house on Maple Street. Brandon stood by the sink, a mug of black coffee in one hand, watching toast burn in the toaster. He hadn't slept. His phone vibrated every 10 seconds, with new messages, unknown numbers, interview requests, podcast invites. He turned the volume off. Bella walked in, earbuds out, phone in hand. She didn't say good morning. She just held the phone up. "Did you know they're calling you the Mop Father?" Brandon didn't look. "Charming. There's a remix," she added. "Some guy turned your knockout into a dubstep drop." He stayed quiet. Bella set her phone down, face suddenly serious. "You're trending on every platform, and my entire school is watching it on loop." Brandon finally turned to her. "And what do you think?" Bella hesitated. "I think it's complicated." He gave a soft, almost invisible nod. "People think you're some secret Navy SEAL or something," she said, half smiling. "You know, like in those movies." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "You've seen my paychecks." "Still," Bella shrugged. "There's something kind of cool about it." But then her smile faded. "I mean, I thought it was cool," she added. "Until this morning." Brandon straightened. "What happened?" Bella looked down, fingers curling around the strap of her backpack. "They started calling me Janitor's Rager. Said I'm probably violent too. That I inherited your anger issues. One guy asked if I'd punch him if he didn't recycle his lunch tray." Brandon's face darkened. "I'm sorry." She shook her head quickly, tears brimming. "I know it's not your fault. I know you didn't want this. But it's happening. And people are making you into something you're not." He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we remind them who we are, not with words, with how we live." Bella swallowed hard. "That sounds nice. But it doesn't change high school." No, he thought. But it might change something deeper. That afternoon, Brandon was summoned to the Combat Elite Arena office. The gym's administrative hallway was quiet, insulated from the noise of punching bags and clanging metal. Brandon knocked twice before entering. Behind a large glass desk sat Claire Bowen, the gym's managing director and co-owner. She was in her early 50s, with short silver hair pulled into a sharp bob and a gaze that could peel paint. A former Air Force logistics officer, Claire ran the gym with the same efficiency she once applied to cargo routes in Afghanistan. "Mr. Carter," she greeted, standing and extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." Brandon shook it firmly. "I won't waste your time," Claire said, sitting again. "I've seen the footage, And the response. Brandon nodded. I'm sure you didn't intend for it to happen, she continued, but you've become quite the symbol. Brandon kept his tone measured. That's never a good thing. Claire smiled faintly. Depends on the symbol. A beat passed. I've reviewed security footage, interviewed witnesses, she said. I know Troy initiated the contact. You were provoked. You didn't throw a punch until he did. I've placed both Troy and Cody on disciplinary leave. Brandon blinked, that he hadn't expected. However, Claire continued. The gym's board is asking whether we should capitalize on this attention. Brandon stiffened. Claire held up a hand. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting a fight promotion or viral stunts, but we are a training facility, and you just demonstrated a level of control restraint and technical precision I haven't seen since I worked with Tier 1 units. You could offer something real here. Brandon shook his head slowly. No, thank you. Claire looked at him. I don't fight for fame, he said. I fight when there's no other option, and I'm not interested in being anyone's mascot. She sat back in her chair, folding her hands. I understand, she said after a long pause, but that wasn't a mascot out there. That was a man showing what true discipline looks like. Brandon didn't answer. Claire stood. If you change your mind, the offer's open. Not for glory, for guidance. These kids don't just need to learn how to throw a punch, they need to learn why not to. Brandon turned toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. I didn't walk into that ring to prove anything, he said softly. I walked away to prove everything. And then he left. Later that evening after dinner, Bella was cleaning out the hall closet when a box toppled from the top shelf. A bundle of envelopes spilled across the floor. She bent down, picking them up, until her eyes landed on a silver seal marked U.S. Department of the Army. Curious, she pulled the envelope open. Inside was a letter, and a commendation certificate, faded, but pristine. Her eyes scanned the words. In recognition of bravery and leadership during Operation Crescent Dagger. Her breath caught. A second envelope revealed a photo grainy taken in a desert outpost. Brandon stood in the middle, younger, but unmistakably him, flanked by 5 other soldiers. They all looked up at the camera with dusty, weary smiles. At the bottom, scribbled in faded pen, to Brandon, the guy who broke orders to save my stupid life. I owe you everything. Bella held the photo to her chest. The man in that picture was not the same man they mocked with a mop. She suddenly realized something. Her dad wasn't just surviving. He was carrying everything quietly, humbly, deliberately. And maybe it was time the world saw who he really was. The dream came again that night. Except it wasn't a dream. It was memory, raw and unfiltered, triggered by the scent of diesel in the wind and the creak of the flagpole outside. Flashback. Syria. 4 years ago, the air was thick with smoke and adrenaline. Brandon crouched behind the broken wall of a desert compound, sand grinding into the seams of his flak jacket, sweat stinging his eyes. Gunfire cracked through the night, like splinters of lightning echoing in the chaos. Viper 1, do you copy? Brandon pressed the comm to his ear. Viper 1 copies. Extraction point is hot. We need to move now. Leave the secondary target. Repeat. Leave the secondary. He looked down the corridor. Just 50 feet away in a half-collapsed cell, a terrified private first class, Shane Milliken was bleeding out, hand raised weakly. The others were falling back just as ordered. Brandon should have followed. He should have obeyed. Instead, he moved. Sir, you can't, someone yelled after him. He didn't answer. He burst through the gunfire like a ghost bullets tearing past. Reached Shane, hoisted him up, one arm slung over his shoulder. The kid was light, too light, bleeding too fast. I've got you. Stay with me. He never saw the RPG until it was too late. It struck the outer wall behind him, knocking them both off their feet. Shane screamed. Brandon's helmet flew off. Blood trickled down the side of his face as he pulled the kid into cover again. The team returned against orders. They pulled Brandon and Shane out under fire. 2 others didn't make it. Brandon never forgave himself. Present Brookside, Texas. Brandon jolted awake, shirt drenched in sweat, chest heaving. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands pressed to his face. The house was quiet. Outside the window, the wind had picked up. The old wind chime clinked gently like a distant call he couldn't answer anymore. In the morning, he didn't speak much over breakfast. Bella noticed. She didn't ask. Instead, she slid something across the table. He looked down. It was the commendation letter. And the photo. Brandon's breath caught. "I found them," she said softly. "In the closet." He didn't touch them. Just stared. "Why did you hide these?" she asked. "You saved someone's life. They gave you a medal." Brandon's voice was quiet. "Because 3 others didn't come home." Bella leaned in. "But that wasn't your fault. I disobeyed orders." He said, his tone flat. "My call got men killed. That medal feels like a lie." She shook her head. "No. That medal is for the person you chose to be. The kind of person who goes back for the one nobody else would. The kind of person who doesn't walk away from a kid bleeding alone." He looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't a little girl anymore. And for the first time he saw something in her face that reminded him of the soldiers he used to lead a quiet fire. A refusal to let the world decide what people were worth. He reached out, lifted the photo, stared at it for a long time. "They said I broke the chain of command," he murmured. "Maybe I did." Then almost to himself. "But if I had to do it again, I would." Later that day, Brandon returned to the gym not for work, but to return a set of keys. The arena was half empty, the afternoon lull setting in. A few trainees were shadowboxing in the corner. The mop bucket waited for him in its usual place. He ignored it. As he walked toward the back office, a familiar voice called out, "Brandon." He turned. It was Cody Thompson leaning against a weight rack, arms folded, smile too tight to be friendly. "Got a second?" Brandon didn't stop walking. Cody followed. "Look, I just want to talk," he said. "About what happened. Things got out of hand." Brandon stopped, turned slowly. Cody lowered his voice, stepping closer. "You embarrassed Troy. He's losing a sponsorship. That video, it cost him real money. And Claire's not exactly thrilled with either of us." Brandon said nothing. "So here's the deal," Cody continued, tone shifting, eyes harder now. "You're not gonna fight again. You're not gonna teach. You're gonna quit and disappear just like before." Brandon's face remained still. "You want to know why guys like you wash floors?" Cody sneered. "Because that's all the world lets you do after you've peaked. Your time's up." Brandon didn't blink, but something in his eyes, something steel-cold and precise, made Cody step back half an inch. Then Brandon said very calmly, "I've been in rooms where men threatened my life. Some of them even had guns. None of them shook as much as you just did." Cody's face flushed. Brandon turned and walked away without another word. This time, he didn't hear laughter behind him. Just silence. That night, Brandon sat on the porch, the commendation letter resting on his lap. Bella beside him. "I never wanted attention," he said. "I just wanted peace." Bella leaned her head on his shoulder. "Maybe peace isn't about hiding from the past," she said gently. "Maybe it's about making peace with who you really are." He looked down at her, eyes misting. "You sound like your mom," Bella smiled. "You say that like it's a bad thing." He chuckled quietly. The wind shifted. The night was cool, but for the first time in a long time, Brandon didn't feel cold. The knock came just after sunset. 3 sharp raps on the screen door, not hesitant, not aggressive. Just calculated. The kind of knock that didn't ask for permission. It announced itself. Brandon looked up from the kitchen sink, where he was rinsing out Bella's paintbrushes from her school project. He reached for the dish towel, drying his hands slowly, and made his way to the front door. Standing on the porch, bathed in orange dusk light, was Cody Thompson. He wore his usual sleeveless hoodie, but his posture was off arms, crossed too tightly, jaw clenched beneath the facade of calm. "Evening," Cody said. Brandon didn't answer. He simply leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, waiting. Cody exhaled a shallow breath and scratched the back of his neck. "Look," he said, "I figured I owed you a visit. After everything." Brandon raised one eyebrow. Cody shifted. "I came to apologize. You know, man to man." Brandon didn't move. There was something about the way Cody said apologize, like it was a word he'd rehearsed, not one he believed. Cody continued, his voice coated in something smooth and slippery. "Things got heated. Troy acted out. I was just trying to keep the energy up in the gym, man. Hype things up a bit." Brandon folded his arms, slow and deliberate. "By stealing my mop and setting me up for a fight I didn't ask for." Cody shrugged. "You handled it. Everyone saw. Hell, you went viral." There it was. Not remorse. Resentment. Brandon's jaw tightened. Not from anger. From recognition. This wasn't an apology. It was a warning. Cody stepped closer to the screen door, smile tightening. "But see," he said, voice dipping lower. "Your little moment, it's costing people. Troy's out of a sponsorship deal. The gym's board is breathing down Claire's neck. You made waves, Carter." Brandon didn't blink. "I didn't make waves. You made noise." "There's a difference." Cody's smile vanished for a moment. He leaned in just enough for his voice to drop further. "Just saying, might be easier for everyone if you disappeared. Again. Before things get messier." Brandon's eyes flicked only slightly, just enough to register the real intent beneath the words. There was a time years ago when he might have dragged someone like Cody down the porch stairs for saying that. But he wasn't that man anymore. Instead, he held Cody's gaze steady, cold, unwavering. And then he did the one thing Cody wasn't expecting. He smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile a man gives when he's already walked through fire and survived worse than any threat standing on his porch. "You're scared," Brandon said calmly. Cody blinked. "What, you're not here to apologize. You're here because I exposed something in you, and it terrifies you." Cody bristled. "You don't know anything about me." Brandon stepped forward now so that the screen door was the only thing between them. "I know the look in your eyes," he said softly. "I've seen it in green recruits the night before a mission. I've seen it in men trying to act tougher than they are. I saw it in a mirror once, too." Cody stepped back, his composure cracking just for a second. Then he straightened. "Just remember," he said, his voice sharp again, "this town loves a hero until the next one shows up." And with that, he turned and walked down the steps, disappearing into the dusk. Brandon watched until Cody's car pulled away from the curb. He stood there for another minute, the evening wind brushing against him like a distant warning. Then he closed the door. Later that night, Brandon sat on the back porch with Bella, a thermos of chamomile tea between them. The stars had just begun to dot the Texas sky. Bella scrolled her phone in silence, then set it down. "He came here, didn't he?" she asked. Brandon nodded slowly. "Cody. What did he want?" Brandon took a sip of tea, thinking. "He wanted to scare me," he said finally. "Or maybe convince himself that I'm still scared." Bella tilted her head. "Are you?" Brandon looked up at the stars. "Not of him," he said. "I'm scared of who I used to be." Bella leaned her head on his shoulder. "You're not that man anymore." Brandon gave a soft, tired smile. "I hope not." The next morning, Brandon returned to work at the old transit depot, sweeping cigarette butts from the cracked pavement, wiping down the rusted benches no one seemed to sit on anymore. It was quiet, and that was the way he liked it. Until 2 police cruisers pulled up. He turned confused as 2 officers stepped out. One young one, older, both serious. Brandon Carter, the older one, asked, "Yes, we need you to come with us. Just for questioning?" Brandon's brows furrowed. "What is this about?" The younger cop held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a boot print cut from a training mat. "We've got footage of a break-in at Combat Elite Arena last night," the officer said. "Storage room was trashed. Blood found near the lockers. Looks like someone left in a hurry." Brandon's mouth tightened. "And you think it was me?" The older cop shifted. "We're not accusing you. We just need you to answer a few questions. Someone suggested you might have had a motive." He didn't ask who. He already knew, Cody. At the station, Brandon sat in a holding room, quiet, calm, unmoved, until the door burst open and a familiar voice cried out. "He didn't do anything, Bella." Tears streaming down her face. Backpack still half-zipped, her school uniform rumpled. She pushed past the front desk and stood in front of her father, like a soldier standing guard. "He didn't do it," she shouted at the stunned officers. "My dad's not a criminal. He's a hero." The room froze. The older officer stepped forward trying to calm her, but someone, maybe a bystander, maybe another officer, had already pulled out their phone. The video began recording. The clip would travel faster than the last one. But this time, it wasn't Brandon who was at the center. It was Bella. Fierce. Loyal. Unshakable. A teenage girl standing in a police station defending a man the world had misunderstood. And just like that, a new story began to take shape, one that couldn't be edited, trimmed, or twisted. A story of a daughter's voice, a father's silence, and a truth that refused to stay buried. Brandon Carter sat in the narrow metal chair of the Brookside police station, his hands resting calmly on his knees, back straight, face unreadable. Not because he had nothing to feel, but because he had spent years learning how not to show it. Across from him, Detective Paul Navarro flipped through a file without looking up. "No prior arrests," Navarro said. "Honorable discharge, 2 commendations, Silver Star. Yet somehow your boot print ends up in a crime scene." Brandon said nothing. The detective finally looked up. "You see how that looks to someone like me?" Brandon returned the stare. "Boot prints don't prove guilt." No, Navarro admitted, but they raise questions, especially when someone's got a viral video and a motive. Brandon leaned forward just slightly. "I had no motive. I didn't break into the gym. I haven't even been there since yesterday morning." Navarro tapped the side of the folder. Cameras in the back stairwell were disabled. No witnesses, just blood-broken lockers and your size 12 boot print on the mat. Brandon's voice was steady. "I wear size 11.5. Navarro paused. Brandon continued. "Military standard-issue soles aren't unique. 1,000 guys in this county probably own a pair." Navarro's brow twitched. He closed the file. "You're free to go. For now." Brandon stood. "I didn't expect justice, just courtesy." He turned toward the door, then paused. "When you find out who really did it," he added, "without turning back, I suggest you look for the one who's most afraid of losing." Outside, a storm was gathering, not just in the sky, but in the hearts of everyone watching. Bella stood on the station steps, still in her school clothes, flanked by a crowd of students' parents and curious townsfolk. What had begun as a viral clip had now sparked a conversation that could no longer be ignored. A local reporter stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, did you vandalize the gym?" Brandon didn't answer. Bella did. "My father didn't do anything wrong," she said, voice loud and clear. "He's being targeted because someone's scared of who he used to be and who he still is." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brandon placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Let's go," he whispered. Back home, the house felt quieter than usual. Even the old wind chime on the porch had stilled, as if holding its breath. Brandon sat at the kitchen table, eyes on the floor. Bella moved quietly, setting down a bowl of soup in front of him. She hesitated, then sat across from him. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. "I'm fine," he said, finally. "Just tired." Bella watched him. "You don't look tired. You look cornered?" He gave her a tired smile. "I've been cornered before. This is different." She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You know who did it." Brandon nodded once. "Cody," she said. Another nod. "So what now?" Brandon looked out the window where the wind had begun to pick up. Now he said quietly, "We wait." But Brandon wasn't the only one waiting. Claire Bowen stood alone in her office at Combat Elite Arena, watching the security footage from the night of the break-in for the 6th time. The visible cameras had captured nothing useful. But Claire wasn't one to rely only on what was visible. She clicked open a file folder labeled Maintenance Wing. Years ago, when she'd helped renovate the building, she'd installed a backup feed that linked to an old camera tucked behind the water heater, one even the trainers didn't know about. She fast-forwarded until a grainy figure entered the frame. At first, it was just a shadow. But then, she froze the frame. Cody, dragging a crowbar, looking straight into the darkness, unaware that darkness was looking back. Claire exhaled, slowly, controlled. Then she reached for her phone. That evening, as the rain began to fall over Brookside, Brandon heard a knock. Not sharp, not cold, measured, honest. He opened the door. Claire stood there, umbrella in one hand, manila folder in the other. "I have something you need to see," she said. Brandon stepped aside without a word. They sat in the living room, the hum of rain filling the silence. Claire opened the folder and slid the still image toward him. Brandon stared. It was Cody, clear as day, caught red-handed. Claire didn't say anything for a long moment. "Then I believe you, Brandon. I always did. But now I can prove it." He exhaled deeply, like a man finally stepping out of a long tunnel. Claire continued. "I confronted the board. They wanted me to sweep it under the rug. Said pressing charges would make the gym look weak. I told them we don't build strength by protecting cowards." Brandon nodded slowly. "Thank you." Claire studied him. "Why didn't you defend yourself more publicly? Why let it get this far?" He met her gaze. Because fighting isn't always the answer. Sometimes waiting is the hardest kind of strength. She sat back, letting those words settle. Then, almost as an afterthought, she asked, "Why did you take a janitor job in the first place?" Brandon looked at the rain sliding down the window. "Because after I came home, he said I thought I had to be small. I thought disappearing was the only way to not bring the war home with me." He turned to face her. "But now I see. The war was never the problem. Running from it was." Claire stood, slowly leaving the folder behind. "I'm opening a new class," she said. "Not for fighters, for learners, for the kind of strength we don't teach enough." She looked at him carefully. "And I want you to teach it." Brandon didn't respond, but something in his eyes, soft, steady, and quietly awakened, gave her the answer she needed. Meanwhile, across town, Cody sat in his apartment lights, off watching the news on his cracked TV. The headline read, "Security footage reveals true culprit behind gym break-in." His hands trembled, not with fear, with rage. Everything was slipping, but he still had one card left to play. The gym was quiet. It was the rare hour between the morning grinders and the evening warriors, the calm lull when sweat had settled and the scent of disinfectant still lingered in the air. Brandon hadn't been inside Combat Elite Arena since the storm of accusations and viral headlines. Stepping through the front doors again felt like opening a book he thought he'd closed forever. But he didn't come for closure. He came because someone had looked him in the eye and offered not pity, not praise, but purpose. Claire Bowen stood near the center of the floor clipboard, in hand her ever-present precision, giving her the air of someone born to command. She turned as he approached. "You came," she said, as if she hadn't doubted it for a moment. Brandon nodded. "I'm still not sure why." Claire motioned for him to follow her toward a small room off the main training area. The door was marked simply, Studio B. Inside was a modest space. No punching bags, no cages, no dumbbells. Just mats and silence. Claire set the clipboard down and gestured toward the floor. "This is where it starts." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Starts what?" "Something different," she said. "A class not about how to throw a punch, but about why not to. About restraint, integrity, controlled power." She looked him squarely in the eye. "Combat ethics." Brandon crossed his arms. "You think anyone would come to that?" Claire smirked. "They already signed up. The waiting list is full." He blinked. She picked up a sheet from her clipboard and read aloud. "Teenagers, veterans, a few cops, 2 ex-convicts, even a couple of nurses. People who've seen violence and people who've caused it." Brandon said nothing, but something shifted behind his eyes. Claire continued, gentler now. "They don't need a fighter, Brandon. They need a man who knows when not to be one." He turned away, pacing slowly around the room, hand dragging lightly against the wall. "I'm not a teacher." "No," she said. "You're something better. You're living proof. That landed." Brandon stood in silence for a long beat. Then he looked down at the mat. "When I was in Syria," he said, voice low, "we had this local guide. Never carried a weapon. Never wore a uniform. But every soldier listened to him because when things got loud, he got quiet. When everyone panicked, he whispered the right path. Claire watched him. He saved more lives than half our unit Brandon added." He looked up. "I always thought, if I ever made it back, I'd try to be like that." Claire didn't smile. She just handed him a single key. "To the studio," she said, "if you choose to stay." He took it. And for the first time in years, he chose to stay. That evening, Brandon walked home, not by his usual quiet route, but through Main Street, head-high eyes forward. People noticed. A few nodded. Some hesitated, as if unsure how to greet a man who had become legend by accident. He didn't mind. He wasn't walking for them. He was walking for himself. At home, Bella was in the living room sorting through college brochures with a pink highlighter in hand. Her Air Force Academy packet lay open, creased from overuse. When Brandon stepped in, she looked up instantly, reading the shift in his posture. "You took the offer," she guessed. He held up the key. Bella grinned. "About time." He sat beside her, scanning the brochures. "I used to think being a good father meant staying out of the way," he said. "Letting the world forget me, so it wouldn't touch you." Bella softened. "But the world doesn't work like that." "No," Brandon agreed. "It doesn't." She nudged one of the flyers toward him. "They're hosting a community veterans night next week. Speakers' recognitions. You should go." He smiled faintly. "They probably already have enough people with stories. Not your story." He looked at her. There it was again, that same unwavering fire. Maybe she had always been his greatest teacher. The next day, Studio B held its first class. Brandon stood at the center of the mat as the participants trickled in, young men with restless eyes, women with guarded postures, older veterans with stiff joints, and heavy silence. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Brandon began not with instruction, but with a question. What makes a person strong? The room stayed quiet. He let the silence stretch. "Is it muscle?" he asked. "Aggression technique?" Still silence. Then he answered himself. "No. Strength is knowing exactly how much force you're capable of and choosing not to use it. A few heads nodded. Brandon stepped forward slow and steady. Today I won't teach you how to hit. I'll teach you when to walk away, and why that will be the hardest thing you ever do. By the end of the hour, no one had thrown a punch, but every heart in the room had changed shape. Outside the gym, Bella waited with her backpack slung over one shoulder. Brandon walked out, sweat clinging to his collar, but his expression lighter than it had been in years. "How was it?" she asked. He took a long breath. "Different," he said. "Right." She smiled. They started walking home together side by side. "I'm proud of you," she said. Brandon looked over. "I'm trying to be someone you can be proud of. You already were," she said. And for once, he believed her. Far across town in a quiet office, Cody Thompson sat in front of his computer. He was watching the new video. It wasn't viral yet, but it was spreading. A clip from the class. Brandon speaking calm and strong. Cody stared at the screen, rage simmering just below the surface. He'd thought breaking the man would be easy. But some men don't break. They transform. And that terrified him more than any punch ever could. The second class was standing room only. Studio B, once a forgotten corner of Combat Elite Arena, now buzzed with a quiet energy. No music, no sparring gloves, just mats, breath, and attention. Brandon stood barefoot in the center of the room, wearing a plain black t-shirt and old Army PT pants. He held no clipboard, no whistle, no performance. Just presence. He scanned the room. Some faces were familiar young fighters who once mocked him, now sat cross-legged on the mat, their backs, straight eyes forward. Others were new, a mother of 3 who had grown tired of yelling to be heard, a teenage boy fresh out of juvenile detention, a retired sheriff with a knee brace and a guarded expression. No one spoke. Brandon nodded. Good. He walked a slow circle, letting his words rise naturally. Some of you came here expecting martial arts, he began. Some came expecting stories. Some maybe came to see if the janitor was just a fluke. A few chuckles, nervous, but not mocking. He paused. "I'm not here to make you stronger," he said. "You already are. You survived. Whatever brought you here, you lived through it. And that takes strength." He stopped, looked directly at a tall man with prison tattoos curling up his forearm. "Restraint," Brandon said, "is the highest form of power." The man lowered his eyes, and for a moment his chest seemed to loosen. Brandon continued, gesturing toward a line of wooden practice staffs at the wall. "I could teach you how to strike," he said. "But that won't save your marriage. It won't help you walk into a courtroom without shame. It won't protect your kids from fear." He looked around the room. "What will save you is knowing who you are when no one's watching." The room fell into a silence that wasn't awkward, but sacred. At the back of the class, hidden behind the slightly cracked door, Bella watched. She hadn't planned to. She came to pick up a book she left the day before, but something about her father's voice stopped her feet just past the threshold. She had never heard him speak like this, not in words, but in truth. He wasn't the man hunched over a mop. He wasn't the viral clip. He wasn't a mistake wrapped in silence. He was leading. And every eye in that room, eyes that had once judged, feared, or dismissed him, were locked in attention. Bella pressed her hand to her chest. She didn't realize she was crying until her vision blurred. After class, a line formed, not for selfies, not for questions, just for handshakes. Thank yous. Silent nods. Brandon accepted each one with the same calm grace, not elevated by praise, not dimmed by emotion. Then came Marcos, a 17-year-old with a scar on his left cheek, and a probation officer who insisted he try the class. He stood awkwardly, eyes on the floor. "My dad always said..." Marcos started, then stopped. Brandon waited. Marcos swallowed. He said real men never back down. Brandon nodded slowly. Then he forgot the second part. Marcos looked up. Real men, Brandon said, know when to stand their ground. But the greatest ones know when to walk away and still keep their soul. Marcos breathed out, nodded, and walked away with something in his eyes he hadn't brought with him hope. Later that evening, Brandon walked the length of the gym alone. The sun had dropped low, casting long golden bars through the front windows. Dust motes danced in the air like tiny weightless memories. He stopped in front of the ring, the very ring where it all began, where humiliation was offered and restraint was returned, where a man had been tested not by force, but by choice. He stepped up to the ropes, not to fight, to forgive. In the office above, Claire Bowen watched through the glass. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. What she saw didn't require commentary. She reached for her phone and opened the internal staff board chat. Claire B. Admin Studio B's numbers are through the roof. Weekly class waitlist is full. Adding second session. Title, The Art of Stillness Instructor Brandon Carter. She hit send and smiled. At home, Bella sat at the kitchen table with her college application open on her laptop. The essay prompt read, "Tell us about someone who changed the way you see the world." She stared at the blinking cursor, then began to type. My father never told me he was a hero. He never hung his medals or framed his scars. He swept floors like they were sacred ground. He taught me that dignity isn't loud, and strength isn't about who you can beat. It's about who you refuse to become. He taught me that silence can be power, that kindness can be resistance, that forgiveness can be strength. He changed how I see the world because he changed how he chose to live in it. He's the quietest man I know, and the strongest. She sat back, smiling through her tears. The next day, flyers began popping up around town. New class, Studio B, Combat Ethics and the Art of Stillness. Learn control, learn respect, learn peace. Instructor Brandon Carter. The name caught attention, but it wasn't the name people remembered most. It was the reputation. And it was just beginning to be rewritten. The gym buzzed with its usual afternoon rhythm, gloves thudding against bags, trainers shouting instructions, music pulsing from overhead speakers. But inside Studio B, the energy was different. Quiet. Centered. It was Brandon Carter's 4th class this week, and the room was at capacity. Each session brought new faces, construction workers, retired nurses, even a city councilman rumored to be quietly battling PTSD. Brandon stood barefoot at the edge of the mat, palms open. He was teaching breathwork today. Just breathing. No movement. No combat. Control, he said softly, starts with the breath. If you can master that, you can master a moment. Dozens of students inhaled, exhaled in unison. Bella sat quietly in the back, notebook in hand, sketching her father in profile. Not as a soldier, not as a janitor, but as a teacher. And then the door creaked open. The breath of the room snapped. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 gym members and carrying the weight of arrogance like a crown, was Troy Blake. His jaw was still bruised from weeks ago, though healing. His presence wasn't about recovery. It was about dominance. He scanned the room, eyes pausing on Bella before settling on Brandon. Well, Troy said loud enough for the hall to hear. The monk speaks. No one laughed. Brandon didn't move. Troy stepped inside. I figured I'd come see the great master janitor myself. Maybe learn how to walk away like a coward. A few people stirred, unsure if this was part of the class or an ambush. Bella stood ready to speak, but Brandon raised one hand without turning. I'll handle this, he said calmly. Troy took another step. You embarrassed me in front of the world. You think this little peace club changes that Brandon looked at him not with challenge, but with clarity. I think nothing changes who we are unless we're ready for it to." Troy scoffed. Easy words from a guy who hit once and got lucky. Brandon stepped forward slowly. "I didn't hit you, Troy," he said, voice low. "I redirected you. That's different." The room was dead quiet. Troy's jaw tightened. "Then why not give me a chance now? Just you and me. No tricks, no mops. Show them who the real man is." Brandon's eyes didn't flinch. "No." The word dropped like a hammer. Troy blinked. "No, I don't fight to prove anything," Brandon said. "Not anymore." Troy turned to the crowd, his voice louder, sharper. "You all think this guy's some kind of guru. He's a fraud, a washed-up coward in disguise." Someone near the back, an older veteran named Carl, stood. "That coward saved my son from an overdose," Carl said. "With words, not fists." Another student, a woman in nursing scrubs, added, "He taught my daughter not to hit her bullies back, but to stand with her head up." Then a third voice joined in. "He taught me that walking away doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're stronger than your past." Brandon said nothing. He let the room speak. Troy looked around, suddenly smaller than his frame, his bravado deflating with every voice raised in calm defiance. He turned back to Brandon. "You think you won," he growled. "You think they love you?" Now, Brandon stepped closer, his voice so soft it pulled everyone forward. "This isn't about winning," he said. "It's about healing." Then, quietly but firmly, the unexpected happened. A boy from the back, maybe 14, scrawny, the kind of kid you wouldn't notice in a crowd, walked to Troy and stood in front of him. He said nothing. He just stood. Then another student stood beside him. Then a third. And a fourth. Until a line formed a shield between Brandon and Troy. No one yelled. No one raised a fist. They just stood there. Together. Troy looked into the wall of silent faces and faltered. For the first time, his posture cracked. His bravado had nowhere to go. He turned toward the door, fists clenched, face red. Before he could step out, Claire Bowen appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Blake," she said flatly, "you're no longer welcome in this facility. Your membership has been revoked." Troy didn't respond. He brushed past her and disappeared down the hall. The door clicked shut behind him. Brandon turned back to the room. "Respect," he said softly, "is earned in silence more than in shouting." He looked at his students. "And today, you earned mine." The class nodded, some with tears, some with smiles. Bella slipped inside and walked toward him. That she whispered was the greatest thing I've ever seen. Brandon smiled. "Me too." That night at home, Bella uploaded a short video she had secretly taken on her phone, not of Troy's rant, but of the moment the student stood between him and her father. She added no hashtags, no music, just one caption. "This is what strength really looks like." Within hours, it was shared thousands of times. Within days, it was on the local news. And within a week, it was picked up by national outlets as the Silent Shield movement. People began standing silently in solidarity across the country, at schools and hospitals, in courtrooms, when someone was being bullied, disrespected, or dismissed. Not shouting, just standing. Because sometimes you don't fight back with fists. You fight back by standing still and refusing to let darkness pass through you. The first sign was the bucket. It sat at the far corner of the gym floor, bright yellow, half filled with soap and water. A mop leaned against the wall beside it, the kind with gray threads like worn-out rope. At first, no one noticed. Then someone did. "Is that?" The whisper traveled across the room like static. And then they saw him. Cody Thompson. Not in workout gear, not in his old trainer's hoodie, but in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, head-lowered mop in hand. He dipped it in the bucket, wrung it slowly, and began to clean the very floor he used to swagger across. Some watched with confusion, others with suspicion, a few with contempt. But no one interrupted, except Claire. She approached cautiously, arms folded across her chest. "What are you doing here, Cody?" He didn't look up. "Cleaning." Claire narrowed her eyes. "This isn't a job anymore. You're not on payroll. You're not even allowed in the building." Cody paused, straightened, and finally met her gaze. "I know." Claire waited. Cody took a breath. "I figured," he said slowly, "if I was going to learn what strength really is, I ought to start by cleaning up the place where I lost mine." Claire didn't answer right away. Her instinct was to doubt him, to dismiss it as performance, another tactic. But something in his eyes was different. Not broken. Just quiet. She nodded once. "Don't touch Studio B. I wouldn't dare." She walked away, not fully trusting, but not stopping him either. Brandon heard about it from one of the students. He didn't react. He just showed up for class that evening like he always did. The room was packed. The energy, different. Hopeful. Curious. He went through the lesson: breath control, centerline focus, internal stillness. The class flowed like water. When it ended, there was no applause. Only a stillness that stayed long after the bodies moved. As he stepped out into the hallway, he saw him. Cody. Alone, mopping near the front windows. Brandon stood there a moment watching. Cody turned, sensing him, but didn't flinch. Brandon approached. Calm. Measured. "You don't have to do this," he said. Cody wrung out the mop. "I know." Brandon looked at the floor. "You trashed this place." Cody nodded. "I did. You tried to ruin me." Another nod. "You nearly succeeded. That one landed harder." Cody looked up. "I thought, if I could just make you the villain, I wouldn't have to face the one I've been." Brandon said nothing. Cody continued, quieter now. "You didn't fight me, and that made it worse. I didn't know how to handle being forgiven." "I didn't forgive you," Brandon replied. Cody blinked. Brandon stepped closer. "You're not owed forgiveness. That's not how it works. You want redemption. It's not in the mop. It's in whether you keep showing up when nobody claps." Cody nodded, ashamed but still standing. Brandon reached into his back pocket and handed him a folded towel. "Start with this," he said. "Clean the ring." Cody took the towel, but before he turned, Brandon added, "Start with the corner where you fell." That night, Bella and Brandon sat on the porch, the wind chime tinkling above them. Bella sipped her tea. He really showed up. Brandon nodded. To mop, another nod. Bella laughed softly. "That's wild." Brandon didn't smile, but his voice softened. "Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is kneel down where he once stood tall." Bella looked at him. "You believe he can change. I believe people can choose to," he said. "Some don't. But if they do, it starts small. With a mop, with a silence." Bella leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know what I think," she whispered. "What you're changing more people by standing still than most people ever will by shouting." Brandon didn't reply, but he knew she was right. 2 weeks later, Combat Elite Arena held its first open ethics session. No membership required, no sign-up sheets. People from all over town came: teachers, war vets, grocery clerks, bikers, teenagers in trouble. Brandon stood at the front of Studio B, and next to him was Cody. Not leading, just helping. Setting out mats, offering water, listening. When someone asked why he was there, he said, "I'm here to learn." And when the session ended, he waited until everyone left. Then he walked to Brandon. "This is the place I mocked you," he said. Voice rough. "I'd like to stay, but only if I can clean here after every class. No title, no recognition, just service." Brandon looked at him a long moment, then nodded. "Then start with the mat," he said. "The one you once thought you owned." Cody dropped to his knees and began to clean. On the studio wall just above the entrance, Claire had framed a new quote, subtle wooden, barely noticeable. But everyone who came to Studio B read it eventually. "The strongest hands are the ones that choose not to strike." And beneath it, in smaller letters, Carter Ethics Code. Est. 2025. The town hall of Brookside hadn't been this full in years. Folding chairs filled the central auditorium. Veterans in crisp uniforms sat beside teenagers in jeans. Local business owners, teachers, nurses, and construction workers stood along the walls, arms crossed, not in defiance, but in reverence. At the front of the stage stood a modest podium dressed in red, white, and blue. Behind it, a single chair had been set, reserved for Brandon Carter. The event had been quietly planned by the city's Veterans Committee after Claire Bowen sent in a letter of recommendation, along with dozens of testimonials from students, parents, and citizens. "We are not honoring a war story," the letter read. "We are honoring a peace story, one that started on a mop and ended in transformation. The man we are recognizing didn't just serve in combat. He chose not to bring the war home. And in doing so, he became a different kind of warrior." Brandon had tried to decline the invitation. Twice. But Bella had stopped him the third time. "Dad," she said, "you've taught everyone how to stand. Maybe it's time you let people stand for you." He sat quietly backstage. Now suit jacket too stiff, collar too tight. His palms rested on his knees. Nervous wasn't the right word. It was deeper than that. He wasn't afraid of being seen. He was afraid of being misunderstood again. Until he heard her voice. Bella stepped up to the podium, a stack of handwritten note cards in her hand, though her fingers were shaking too hard to hold them steady. She looked out at the packed room, then looked down at her father, sitting just off stage. And she smiled. "My name is Bella Carter," she began, voice amplified and soft. "And I'm here to introduce someone I've known my whole life, but only truly understood this year." A hush settled across the room. When I was little, my dad was just my dad. He packed my lunch. He walked me to school. He worked late nights and came home smelling like cleaning supplies and rain. She paused. I didn't know he had medals. I didn't know he'd been in war zones, or that he'd saved lives. I didn't even know he had a nickname in the Army. She looked at Brandon. He never told me he was called Viper 1, because to him that wasn't who he was. It was who he had to be once. Some in the crowd stirred veterans, especially nodding slowly. Bella's voice grew stronger. But what he chose to be after was a man who taught restraint, who taught kindness, who showed me and this entire town that real strength is quiet, that walking away from a fight takes more courage than stepping into one. Brandon looked down, eyes misting. His hands trembled, but not from fear, from pride. Bella turned to the crowd. He's taught a whole community how to breathe again, how to forgive, and how to stand in silence when the world demands we shout. She took a long breath. Today I ask you to honor my father, not just as a veteran of war, but as a soldier of peace, as a man who chose dignity over anger, who chose to rebuild others when no one rebuilt him. She stepped back from the mic. The crowd stood. One by one, veterans, students, officers, nurses, even Cody Thompson in a pressed button-up shirt and slacks, standing at the back of the room with both hands clasped respectfully in front of him. Brandon stood slowly, eyes wide, heart pounding. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, like a pulse, like a heartbeat returning after years of flat silence. He walked onto the stage as the mayor of Brookside approached, holding a small velvet box in his hand. Sergeant Brandon Carter the mayor said. On behalf of this town and the people whose lives you've changed, not just on the battlefield, but here in our community, we are honored to present you with the Brookside Medal of Civil Integrity. Brandon opened the box. Inside was a simple silver medallion etched with the image of a lion bowed not in defeat, but in humility. He stood at the podium for a long moment, unsure of what to say. Then finally, "I was trained to fight," he said. "But war teaches you a truth that most people never learn. Just because you can hurt someone doesn't mean you should." The room leaned in. "I've made mistakes," he said. "I've carried guilt. I've hidden from the world and from my daughter. But something changed when I stopped trying to erase my past and started using it to build something better." He looked at Bella, his voice softening. "I'm not a hero. I'm a father who's trying. A man who's learning that standing still can be its own kind of strength." Then he closed the box and stepped back. The room rose to its feet again. Not for a soldier, but for a teacher, a healer, a man who learned how to put down the weight of war and lift others instead. That night, Brandon sat on the porch, the medal resting on the table beside him. Bella stepped outside with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "You didn't cry," she teased. "I waited until you left the room," he said. She smiled, then held up her phone. "Guess what?" He raised an eyebrow. "Your speech is trending again." Brandon groaned. "Silent Dad turned peace warrior," she read. 50,000 shares. "And someone made a TikTok remix using your line about standing still." He shook his head. "I need a burner phone." Bella laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Dad." He looked down at her. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You gave me back my voice. I just had to learn how to use it differently." They sat in silence, sipping cocoa wind chime clinking softly above. And for the first time in years, Brandon Carter didn't feel like a man who had survived war. He felt like a man who had finally come home. 1 year later, the Texas sun rose gently over Brooks Center for Integrity and Defense, casting long amber shadows through the glass front doors. Morning dew still clung to the grass outside, and a slight breeze carried the scent of fresh wood and warm concrete. Inside the facility hummed with quiet intention. It wasn't a gym. Not exactly. It was something different. There were no posters of ripped fighters or slogans like "No pain, no gain." Instead, hand-painted words lined the hallway in soft, grounded tones. True power is knowing when not to use it. Dignity doesn't shout. It stands. At the heart of the building was a circular training room. No ropes, no cages. Just polished wood floors and one elevated mat, pale gray immaculate and centered beneath a skylight. On the wall beside it, encased in a glass frame, hung an object that had become legend. A yellow mop, its threads frayed, its handle worn smooth. Its presence said more than any trophy ever could. Brandon Carter knelt at the edge of the mat, a white towel in hand. He moved slowly, deliberately, wiping the surface with the same care he once used in silence when no one was watching. Cody knelt beside him doing the same. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Cleaning the mat wasn't a chore anymore. It was a ritual. A way to say this ground is sacred not because of who fought here, but because of what was chosen here. Across the room, a bell chimed. The front doors opened. Brandon looked up, and there she was. Bella. Now 18, radiant in her Air Force Academy blazer, a folder tucked under one arm. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the mop, then locking on her father. He stood. They met halfway across the mat. "Didn't think you'd make it this early," he said, smiling. "I couldn't miss it," she replied. She handed him the folder. Inside was her acceptance letter, sealed with a formal invitation to the officer commissioning program. Brandon opened it slowly. Read. Then looked up at her with a pride that shimmered just behind his composure. "You're flying higher than I ever did," he whispered. She shrugged, teasing. "Well, someone had to clean up after the Air Force." He laughed, not just in amusement, but in that full-bodied, healed kind of way that only comes when you know exactly who you are. Bella looked around. "This place is amazing." Brandon nodded. "It's not mine anymore. It's theirs." He gestured toward the hallway where students were arriving, a young girl who used to flinch at loud noises, a teenage boy with a stutter and a calm stare, an older man in a wheelchair who wheeled himself to the mat without needing help. "This is where they learn," Brandon said. "Not how to fight, but how to choose." Bella turned to him. "And you?" He looked back at the mat. "I'm just the guy who keeps it clean." Later that morning, a quiet ceremony was held in the main hall. No reporters, no fanfare, just family, community, and a few tears. Claire Bowen stepped forward with a small carved plaque. She handed it to Brandon. He read the inscription, "To the one who taught us that silence is strength, stillness is power, and peace is earned." Dedicated to Brandon Carter. Founder Brandon blinked slowly. He reached out and placed the plaque just beneath the mop's glass case, then stepped back. Outside, the sun had risen higher now. Light streamed through the wide windows, warming the floor, casting long, peaceful shadows over the polished mat. Brandon stood in the center, alone for a moment, barefoot. His eyes closed. He inhaled, then exhaled. No thoughts of war, no ghosts of guilt, just breath. Just now. Bella stepped onto the mat beside him, holding her folded uniform jacket in one hand. "Hey, Dad," she said quietly. "Yeah," she smiled. "I'm gonna be okay." Brandon looked at her. "I know." Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small patch, a winged insignia from her new uniform, and gently placed it beside the mop display. "Just a reminder," she whispered, "of what real flight looks like." He didn't speak. He couldn't. But in that moment, Brandon Carter, soldier, janitor, father, teacher, knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Not just for him, for everyone who'd ever chosen to stand with dignity instead of rage, with purpose instead of pride. As the room emptied and the afternoon sun bathed the mat in gold, Brandon walked slowly back toward the case. He paused. One hand reached out almost unconsciously to touch the glass where the mop rested. He whispered more to himself than anyone else. "The mat is clean." And with that, he turned, walked into the light, and let the door close behind him. Fade to black. Soft guitar. End credits roll. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Your stories, your thoughts, even just a hello in the comments mean the world to us. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. We share powerful, uplifting tales like this one, stories that remind us of the strength and kindness and the beauty of quiet courage. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. We're truly grateful you're here. Until next time, stay well, stay kind, and never forget. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing we can do.